Raspberry Pi is the Toyota Corolla of single board computers. Consistent, reliable, and generally unexciting. Also, typically not a great value because the positive attributes are already reflected in the price. Raspberry Pis have the benefit of a massive community and outstanding software support. These make for an excellent user experience for beginners and hardened tinkerers alike. My recent video on the Radxa Zero 3W showed you a different experience, more akin to a car built in a backyard. Better hardware, worse software, and a brittle, janky experience overall. The package will improve over time, but you're more of a test pilot than a relaxed passenger. The Radxa experience is by no means the worst. After all, I've had boards with no English documentation before. But on the continuum of user experiences, it's safe to say that the gold standard is the Raspberry Pi at a 10 and the Radxa at perhaps a 3. For most, that's a bridge too far, but this isn't. Check this out. It's an OrangePi Zero 3W. Yes, it's the same product name as the Radxa, but it's a completely different thing. In the same form factor as the Raspberry Pi Zero 2W, or the Radxa Zero 3W, the OrangePi Zero 3W gives you 8 CPU cores, an NPU, multi-display outputs, DDR5 RAM, optional eMMC, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth. The CPU cores are split into 2 high-performance cores and 6 efficiency cores. The NPU can theoretically give you some light AI performance at the edge. An interesting differentiator is the 3 tops of AI performance coming from the built-in GPU. That's not a lot, but it is enough for some local inferencing. If you'd like a video where I show you how to use that capability, let me know in the comments below. You also get USB 3, PCI Express, even if it's just a single lane, cabled camera and LCD interfaces, microSD, a full RISC-V microcontroller, and headers that are very close to what you get on a Raspberry Pi. If you'd like me to demonstrate the onboard RISC-V microcontroller and some of the IoT interfaces, let me know in the comments below. You can get various configurations, with different amounts of RAM and eMMC. Mine has 6 gigs of RAM and no eMMC. There isn't an NVMe interface, but you could presumably add one via the PCI Express interface. And while the SBC looks like a Pi Zero 2W, it's a different beast indeed. The first major difference is that, unless you want to govern the CPU or rely on thermal throttling, you're going to need this. A few thermal pads, 4 screws, a heatsink with an adorably small fan, and a 2-pin cable tying back to the connector on the back of the board is an active cooling solution. The fan stays off until CPU temperature rises, and the fan is quiet when it is on. It also keeps the board out of thermal throttling when under heavy workloads. Plus, I might add that it looks like my sister's old GTX 480. All of that is great. But if the Radxa Zero 3W taught us anything, it's that the hardware may not be worth it if it's difficult to even load the vendor's distro on the device. And here's where things start to look really good. You have actual choices. You have Ubuntu and Debian. Apparently, OrangePi OS based on Arch and Android will show up at some point too. I loaded Debian Bookworm, trying both the desktop and server images based on the 6.6 Linux kernel. I've got the experience running in the background. There are still some parts of the process that can feel a little weird for some. For example, the links from the download page on the OrangePi site take you to Google Drive. That's perfectly functional, but it doesn't feel that controlled. Yes, the hashes are included, but they're in the same archive. I would feel a little better if the downloads, or at least the hashes, were integrated into the downloads page. Since I didn't have an eMMC variant, I loaded the image onto a microSD card. Rather than using Balena Etcher or Rufus, I used Raspberry Pi Imager. There's nothing special about which imager you use, but a viewer commented that I should show using the Raspberry Pi Imager to work with other SBCs too. One of the benefits is that it can work directly with EXIF archives, but that's not needed in the case of the OrangePi. The first boot brings you straight to the desktop. It uses XFCE, which isn't my favorite, but hey, you can change it to Plasma or GNOME easily enough. The password is OrangePi with no spaces and no uppercase. which you need to change the password or to elevate permissions for system tasks. OrangePi Config is basically OrangePi's version of Raspberry Pi Config. It's a text-based menu tool that ships with the official OrangePi Linux images and gives you a central place to configure the board without having to hunt down config files manually. It's a command line tool that provides a user-friendly interface for configuring OrangePi SBCs, letting you manage system settings, networking, personal preferences, and software packages through a text-based menu system instead of manually editing configuration files. The intent is that it's your primary post-installation configuration tool. You run it with sudo OrangePi config and navigate it with arrow keys. It breaks down into 4 main sections. System. This is where you configure core system components, including hardware features. The display option shows up here if the board supports it, and hardware overlays like enabling serial, I2C, SPI, GPIO, and add-on peripherals are managed here. For example, you can plug in an add-on Wi-Fi card into the M.2 slot and go to System Hardware, navigate to the driver for the card, space select it, save, and reboot to activate it. You can also set performance modes and configure SSH here. They even give you a menu option for updating and upgrading your packages. Network. This manages all network-related settings. It automatically detects wireless capabilities on the board and shows relevant options accordingly. You can set a static IP, toggle Wi-Fi on or off, and enable AvaHi if you want your board to be automatically discoverable on the network. Personal. This is where you set your local time zone and customize the host name. Locale and keyboard layout live here too. Software. This handles software installation, and the options shown depend on what your specific board supports. Things like desktop environments and development tools can be installed from here. Most of the functionality in this utility can be accomplished different ways, but it's a convenient way to call the items generally needed during setup. Less nano, and faster configuration of 03W after first boot. When it comes to performance, the OrangePi is an interesting proposition. The big little core layout isn't anything new, but it does manage to make the 03W a little more than twice as fast as a Raspberry Pi 4. It's about 80% as fast as a Raspberry Pi in the benchmark and workloads that I ran, but your mileage will vary. Linux's thread scheduler handles asymmetric cores just fine. The desktop experience with the 03W was decent. Just for fun, I ran through my Nextcloud worksheet with the 03W, and it was noticeably better than the 4GB Raspberry Pi 4 I loaded it on in my video. All of this was accomplished while pulling 4 to 11 watts, as measured by my extremely cheap power meter. And all of this for $60 for the 6GB version at the time of this video, with another $6 for the cooling fan. Consider these prices. In another timeline, an SBC with 12GB of RAM going for $100 would be considered just fine. However, at this moment, it's pretty good compared to the alternatives. Raspberry Pi Zero 2s have been a go-to for me for small computing tasks for years. With a tiny price tag, but with way more compute than a microcontroller, it's been my easy button for small IoT projects. However, it's hard to see myself ever getting another Raspberry Pi Zero 2 when I can get an OrangePi Zero 3W for just a little more. And yes, the Raspberry Pi Zero 2 is 5 years old, so it's not any surprise that these competitors aren't even in the same performance universe. But if anything, the Radxa board showed that superior hardware is nothing without a stable distro and good community support. And this is where the OrangePi shines. The software and community support isn't as good as a Raspberry Pi, but it's good enough to do what you want it to do. At least in my market, the comparison looks like this. $60 will get you an OrangePi Zero 3W with 6GB of RAM, or that same $60 will get you a Raspberry Pi 5 with 2GB of RAM. The CPU performance difference is small enough that the OrangePi's RAM advantage makes it my choice when going dollar for dollar. If you found this video interesting or helpful, hit like, subscribe, and share this with anyone else that you think should see how fascinating alternative SBCs can be. If you want to support my work, please hype the video and consider becoming a member. I'm not a big deal, so it's really cheap. Or at least it can be. I've added a new, ridiculous tier for anyone that really likes this content and wants me to produce it faster. Depending on the tier, we can hang out on Discord, so there's that. Asking for money feels weird, but these videos take a huge amount of time to make. And speaking of members, I want to thank the new members on the screen for their support. Thanks, and may your day be full of interesting options.